She almost didn't take the job 3 days. A penthouse in the Meridian. Client listed as KJ, no surname, no photograph, full payment transferred before she'd even said yes. Her agency called it a standard discretion booking. Zinhle called her friend Lebo and said, "Something feels off about this one," Lebo said. "The man paid up front, Z. That's self-awareness, not a red flag." She packed her knives. The elevator opened on the 47th floor and there was no one waiting, and the silence had a quality she couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't felt it. Not empty, occupied, like a room holding its breath. "Hello?" The penthouse kept her voice and gave nothing back. She walked through it, the kitchen first, industrial and precise, every surface clean in the way of a space that wasn't lived in so much as maintained. She set her bag down, stood still, listened, checked her phone. 0 bars. Moved left, right, center. Nothing. The building was swallowing the signal whole, and then she heard it down the hall. Low and heavy, the sound of a body managing itself against tile. Controlled, deliberate. The sound of something trying not to be heard and not entirely succeeding. She grabbed the mop from the cleaning cart by the foyer wall. Her father's grip, high and low, weight distributed. She walked toward it. The last door at the end of the hall was slightly open. Steam pushed through the gap like a slow warning. She stopped outside it, her hand steady. She pushed the door with her foot. She saw him before she saw anything else. That was the honest truth of it, the thing she'd never fully admit until much later. She saw him first. The broad shoulders above the waterline. The dark hair pressed flat against his forehead. The particular stillness of his face, head back against the rim, eyes closed, that even in complete repose had an architecture to it. Something precise. Something built. She forgot for exactly 1 second why she was standing in a stranger's bathroom holding a mop. 1 second, then she saw the water pink. Not faint, not a trick of the steam or the light. Actively deeply pink and darkening at his left side toward a color she'd been taught to recognize before she was old enough to have any business knowing it. Her chest did something she hadn't authorized. She was still holding the mop. Her hands had forgotten. He opened his eyes, not startled, not confused. The way someone opens their eyes who was never fully closed, already present, already calibrated. He looked at the mop, at her face. And then he stayed there on her face, with eyes that were very dark and very direct and didn't move. She felt it in her throat. "The cook," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. The kind of voice that landed exactly and knew it. "Bleeding," she said. "I'm aware." She stepped forward. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't reach for the towel on the stand, didn't cover himself. He simply watched her cross the bathroom with those dark, steady eyes, and something in the watching made the room feel significantly smaller than it was. There's no signal in this building. There hasn't been for 3 years." She stopped. "I noticed." She kept her face exactly where it was. "Who are you?" she said. "You have a contract," says KJ. "Then that's what I am." No apology, no discomfort. He sat in water going red around him and spoke to her like a man holding a conversation at a reasonable hour in a reasonable place, and she was struck inappropriately by the line of his jaw, the unhurried control of him. The way he occupied his own stillness like it was something he'd furnished carefully. She looked at the water at his left side. She put the mop down. She knelt on the stone floor beside the bath and worked. The wound was at his lower left ribs, long and deep, a bullet graze that had bled extensively. She packed gauze against it and pressed with both hands. She counted her breath the way her mother counted at the sink that night when she was 9 and didn't know yet what she was watching. He held completely still. She kept her eyes on her hands, on the gauze, on the tape she was cutting with her teeth, because she was not going to ask him to help her, and his hands were right there, and she was aware of his hands. She was aware of him looking at her, specifically, entirely. That specific weight, his gaze at the top of her bowed head, at her hands, at her face when she looked up to check the pressure. She looked up twice. Both times he was watching her with that same dark steadiness, not analyzing. Something more specific than analyzing. She looked back at her hands. The second time she looked up, she didn't look away as quickly as she should have. Neither did he. She tied the last strip of tape, sat back on her heels. The bathroom was quiet except for the cooling water and both of them breathing. She looked up. He was looking at her, close range. His forearm rested on the rim of the bath, relaxed. His face 4 feet from hers, at her level, and the dark eyes not moving from her face. She held it. Your 3 days start now, he said.
Kindly like to subscribe to this channel.
Dinner at 7. Your room is second door past the kitchen. He stood and she turned to the wall and pressed her palm flat against the tile and breathed and told herself firmly she was not going to think about the way he'd looked at her across 4 feet of bathroom floor. She thought about it for the rest of the 3 days. What happened to you tonight? She said. To the tiles, nothing. Who? Go start dinner, Zinhle. The first time he used her name, she turned around. He was gone. She stood in the empty bathroom with her palm flat on the tile and his voice saying her name already living somewhere in her chest where she had not given it permission to live. She was in trouble. She went to the kitchen. She turned around. He was already gone. She stood in the empty bathroom. She looked at the bath still, darkening at its center, fading to pale rose at the edges. She thought about her phone with its 0 bars. She thought about the door she couldn't leave through. She thought about a contract in her pocket for 3 days that she had just understood was not the actual agreement. She went to the kitchen. She made her grandmother's jollof rice. Tomato base, low and slow, smoked at the edges the way her grandmother insisted, past the point where most people stop, that's where the flavor lives. She seasoned until the kitchen smelled like Sunday in Durban. She needed her hands to remember something before all this. She plated it, left it at the pass. He came out 20 minutes later, changed, dark shirt. Moving carefully in a way he was trying not to show, he looked at the plate, at the steam still rising from it. He took it. Went back to the study without a word. She washed the pot, made tea, sat at the island with both hands wrapped around the cup, told herself she was fine. Sometime past midnight the plate appeared beside her elbow. Set down without a sound, empty. Every grain of it. She looked at the empty plate for a long moment. She told herself it meant nothing. And then his phone lit up on the island, face up. Right there his photograph, this face, these eyes. And beneath it Kang Jihoon declared dead. Gang conflict confirmed. Funeral ANNOUNCED 4 Thursday. Her tea went cold in her hands. She read it. Read it again. A third time she looked up slowly. He was in the kitchen doorway. He'd been there long enough to know exactly what she'd just seen. She didn't let her face do anything. Kang Jihoon, she said, quietly, just the name. Laid flat between them like something that needed identifying before either of them could move around it. He walked to the counter, picked up the phone, slid it into his jacket pocket. He looked at her. Cook, he said, low, even, wearing the shape of a request. Before I change my mind about letting you leave at all. The second day. She learned the penthouse by its sounds. He was awake before her, the coffee pod used, the mug clean and dry in the rack, the machine already cooled. He'd been up in the night too. She'd heard it somewhere past 2, low movement in the living room. Controlled, deliberate. The sound of someone managing something their body had no other outlet for. She got up for water and saw him through the doorway, on the floor, dark, no lights. Doing push-ups in the silence with his shirt off, working carefully around the dressing at his ribs. Not exercising, handling something. His breathing was controlled, precise. The movement itself was the point. He hadn't seen her. She stood in the shadow for 4 seconds. Then she filled her glass and went back to her room. She did not sleep for a long time. She was in the kitchen by 7. Made breakfast, something that required her full attention, each component needing specific heat, specific timing. No room for her mind to wander. She left his plate at the pass. Went back to prep. She heard the study door. His footsteps. And then they stopped. She turned. He was in the kitchen doorway, not moving, looking at the plate, then at her. You used the small jar, he said. Second shelf, left side. She kept her hands where they were. It was the right one for the dish. That's my mother's spice blend. Quiet. I didn't tell anyone where it was. She turned around. His face was doing nothing, completely controlled. But something around his eyes had retreated somewhere fast, the way you protect something before you've decided whether to. It smelled right, she said, simply. Because it had. He held her eyes for a moment. Then he picked up the plate and washed it himself at the sink and put it in the rack and went back to the study. She stood in the kitchen and looked at the second shelf. The small jar. She thought about a woman she'd never met and a spice blend that had lived in that exact spot, left side, waiting. She went back to prep. She was more careful for the rest of the day, not less attentive, more. Like something in her had understood that this was a space that held things carefully, and she should too. Lunch. She made doenjang jjigae. She'd been working on the recipe for weeks: fermented soybean stew, the kind her research called comfort food, the kind you make when you want to feed someone something that actually reaches them. She had the broth exactly where she wanted it when she felt the shift in the air. That particular change in pressure when another person decides to be inside a room differently. She didn't turn around. He crossed the kitchen, stood on the other side of the counter. He looked at the pot. She handed him the spoon without speaking. He tasted it, set the spoon down. The zucchini wants 90 more seconds. He went back to the study. She looked at the space he'd just left. She gave the zucchini 90 more seconds. She brought the plate to the study door, knocked. He opened it and took it without speaking. She turned to leave. "It's better than the recipe," he said. She kept walking. But she smiled at the wall. She told herself it was just professional satisfaction. She told herself that for a whole hour. Dinner. She heard the counter stool scrape out while her back was turned. She kept her hands on the cooktop, adjusted the flame, let the kitchen adjust to the fact of him sitting there. She'd felt it building all day: the study door, the spice jar, the 90 seconds, and now here was his stool pulled out, like a statement neither of them was going to name. She plated the food, set it in front of him, close. The counter wasn't wide. She was close enough to see the exact line of his jaw when he looked up from the plate to her face. The look went on 3 seconds longer than it needed to. She held it for every one of those seconds before she stepped back to her own end. She ate standing. He ate without speaking. The kitchen was quiet in the specific way of two people who have made a wordless agreement to leave certain things alone. She could work in this quiet. It didn't feel like tension. It felt like something that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. He finished, set down his fork. "Groundnut was right," he said. He went back to the study. She looked at the empty plate. Employment, she told herself. She didn't believe herself. It happened at the stove. She was reaching across for the oil. She'd moved it to the back for counter space, and her wrist caught the edge of the pot handle and it shifted, and the steam hit the inside of her wrist before she could pull back. She hissed hard, yanked her arm in. She went to the sink. He was in the kitchen in under 10 seconds. She heard the study door and then his footsteps, and then he was at the counter coming around it, and she opened her mouth to say, "I'm fine." He took her hand before she got the words out. He held it under the cold tap. His grip was firm enough to keep her still and gentle enough that she felt the care in it, both things at once, which was exactly him. He held it under the water and looked at the burn and didn't speak, and she watched his hands because his hands were easier to look at than his face. They weren't easier. His hands were careful, precise. The kind of careful that came from knowing what damaged skin needed and responding to it without hesitation. He dried the wrist, opened the kit, applied the cooling gel in slow strokes, watching her face while he did it, not the burn. "Tell me if the pressure." "It's fine," she said. He wrapped it. 2 strips of tape, neat, identical to the strips he'd applied to his own ribs 2 days ago with these same hands. He held her wrist when he was done, fingers loose, not gripping, just present. Her pulse against his thumb. She let him. She looked at him then. His profile, the jaw, the dark lash. He was looking at the bandage. Then he looked up and they were at close range, and neither of them looked away. The pot was still on the stove, half-made, the kitchen completely still. "I heard it from the study," he said. "You were listening." "I pay attention," he said. He released her wrist, crossed to the counter, picked up the oil she'd been reaching for and moved it to the front where she could reach it. He went back to the study. She stood at the sink looking at the oil he'd moved, the 2 strips of tape on her wrist. The particular way he said "I pay attention," not like a boast, like a fact he'd already decided about himself. She told herself firmly to be careful. She was already not being careful. She had not been careful since she picked up a mop and walked toward a sound. Past 10. Kitchen clean. She went to the balcony because the city was doing something worth watching and she needed air. The balcony door opened behind her. He came and stood beside her. Not close. A careful distance, deliberately maintained. Both of them faced the city. Seoul at this hour was endless, lights on lights. The Han River dark through the center of it, alive at its edges. She didn't speak first. She'd learned he spoke when he was ready and not before. "There's a night market," he said, out of nothing. "About an hour east. My mother took me every autumn." A pause. The city moved below. She bought tteokbokki every time. She'd eat half and save the rest in her pocket. By the time we got home, it was cold, and she'd eat it anyway in the kitchen with the lights off. Zinhle looked at his profile. He was looking at the river. She bought a hair clip at every visit too, always the same shape, different colors. She had maybe 30 of them in a box. Another pause. She never wore any of them, she just liked to have them. River caught the light below. My father used to get called to crime scenes when I was in the car, she said. He wasn't supposed to take me. He'd park a block away and leave the window cracked and tell me to stay. I'd sit there watching him work. She paused. I was never afraid. I always thought there was something wrong with me for that. He turned his head, looked at her. There's nothing wrong with you, he said, not comfort, not reassurance. The delivery of something he'd considered and concluded. The city went on below. 47 floors down, ordinary life with no idea. Two people with no business being this quiet together, being exactly this quiet. At 11 o'clock above a city that didn't know them. She went in first. She felt him watch her go. The back of her neck knew it. She lay in the dark and thought about hair clips in a box. About what it means to collect something you never use, not because you forgot, but because the having of it was always the point. She thought about 2 days left. She didn't sleep for a long time, day 2. They haven't touched. They haven't said anything close to what's actually happening between them. But you felt it, didn't you? The stove, the balcony, the way he moved that oil to the front without being asked. 2 days is almost nothing, and almost nothing is all it took. Day 3 is the last day. What happens before she leaves? Stay for it, the last day. She felt it the moment she woke up. The way the light sat differently. The particular quality of a morning that already knows its ending. She came out of the room. The coffee was on the counter, her cup white, slightly chipped on the rim, the one she'd reached for on day 1 by instinct and hadn't switched since. 2 sugars. A small measure of milk, not much. Exactly right. He was at his end of the counter, looking at the window. She picked up the cup, tasted it. Exactly right. She looked at him. He was still looking at the window. You know how I take it, she said. I pay attention, he said. The morning came in through the glass. Low, even. She stood at her end of the counter and he stood at his, and the whole apartment was quiet, and she thought, this is the last morning. This is the last one. She cooked breakfast. She made umquisho, samp and beans, her grandmother's method, the dish that takes the whole morning and fills a kitchen with something that smells like where you come from. She didn't plan it. Her hands chose it. She understood why. She needed something that took time. She needed these last hours to be full. He came out of the study and sat at the counter without being called. He ate what she set in front of him. She ate at her end. They didn't speak through the meal, and the silence was nothing like day 1's silence. That was 2 strangers managing space. This was 2 people in a kitchen that had become theirs over 72 hours, and both of them knowing it, and neither of them saying so. She stood to clear the plates. He carried his own to the sink. He stood beside her and washed it himself. His arm brushed hers at the tap, and neither of them moved away. They just stood there, side by side, the warm water, the quiet kitchen, the small domestic fact of 2 people sharing a sink on the last morning of something that was never supposed to be more than 3 days. She stared at the water. He stared at the water. I'll clean the kitchen before I leave, she said. I know, he said. He went back to the study. She packed the way she always packed, methodically. No drama. Chef's bag first, knives, the small notebook where she writes adjustments in recipe margins, the scale she carries everywhere. Then her personal things. She came back to the kitchen and cleaned it with the full attention it deserved. Every surface. Every shelf restocked exactly as she found it. She cleaned the stove where 3 days of meals had happened, and she was on the spice shelf when she stopped. The small jar. Second shelf, left side, his mother's blend. She'd recognized it by smell before she saw it: toasted coriander, dried orange peel, a warmth underneath that she couldn't name but knew from the way it settled into food. Made with care. Made for someone. She closed the shelf. She put on her coat. She brought her bags to the foyer. He came out of the study when he heard her at the elevator. She didn't know if he'd been listening for it. She suspected he had. He walked to the kitchen counter, slid an envelope across without looking at her. She opened it. Counted, read the number twice. This is more than the contract, she said. It's accurate, he said. She looked at the number 1 more time, closed the envelope, put it in her bag. She stood at the counter. She had something in her chest she'd been managing for 2 days. It had been manageable until exactly this moment. This kitchen, this counter, this man who watched the city with her at 11 o'clock and moved oil to the front of the counter without being asked and left coffee waiting every morning and held her wrist like it was the most important thing he'd ever held. Jihoon, he looked at her. Full on, completely she held it. Safe trip, she said. She pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. She stepped in and turned around. He'd moved to the kitchen doorway, arms loose at his sides, looking at her across the apartment the way he'd looked the first night in the bathroom, completely still, completely present, except this stillness had 3 days in it now. 3 days of counter stools and 90 seconds and I pay attention and a balcony at 11 o'clock and hair clips in a box. She held it for 1 more second. The doors closed. She went down 47 floors with her bags and her knives and the envelope, and she stood in the elevator counting the floors and she breathed very carefully. And she did not cry because she was Zinhle Khumalo and her father raised her better, and also because crying would mean she was admitting something she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. She came out into the lobby, through the glass doors. The street hit her, cold, ordinary soul going about itself with no idea, and she stood on the pavement and breathed the cold air in and told herself, "I'm free." She walked to the taxi stand. She didn't look back at the building. She was very good at not looking back. She booked a hotel in Mapogu for the night. Small, clean. Her room was warm and quiet and exactly right for 1 person. She was fine. She ate alone at a restaurant 2 blocks over. Ordered well. Ate every bite. Came back to the room and opened her calendar and mapped out the next month Busan, then Incheon, then back to Johannesburg to see her father. Practical. Forward. Done. She closed the laptop. She lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. She thought about a glass of water on a floor outside her room that she'd never mentioned because mentioning it would have made it a thing and she was not making it a thing. She thought about 2 strips of tape on her wrist, and I pay attention said to the middle distance. She thought about going home. She opened her phone. Her finger moved before she decided anything. 1 more night. She booked 1 more night at the hotel. She put the phone down. She told herself it was practical. The connection was tight. 1 more night made logistical sense. She turned out the light. She lay in the dark and thought about a night market and a woman who bought hair clips she never wore because the having of them was the point. She slept. She dreamed about nothing she'd admit to. The next morning she had 1 errand. Ingredients she'd promised herself before she left, her own version of baburi, a recipe she'd been developing, adapted for what she could find in Seoul. Apricot jam, curry leaves, a specific dried chili she'd found at Namdaemun Market on a previous contract, 40 minutes. In and out. She was in the spice aisle, comparing 2 versions of the chili, when her father's voice landed in her ear the way it always did, clear, unhurried, like he was standing right there. Peripheral first. Don't show you've seen. She didn't look up from the chili. Left. A man in a gray jacket at the end of the aisle, standing still in a place where still didn't make sense. Everyone in a market was moving towards something. He was aimed at her. She paid for what was in her hand. Moved right, easy pace between 2 stalls. A second man appeared at the end before she reached it. She breathed. She set her pace. She did not run yet because running told them she'd seen them, and she needed more distance before she could afford to tell them that. She cut through the narrow supply corridor behind the stalls, uneven ground, no clear line of sight, and she ran here. Low. Fast. Her father ran half marathons until he was 53. He made her come on Saturday mornings whether she wanted to or not. She ran and she was grateful for every Saturday she'd hated. They were faster, or there were more of them than she'd counted. The arm came from the left, a gap she'd cleared, or thought she'd cleared, and she twisted. She fought. She pulled 1 arm free and didn't get anywhere with it because the second body was already there, and the van door was already open and she was already going in. She did not scream. She pressed her father's face into her mind like a hand against a wound. The hood came down. The last thing she saw was the Namdaemun Market lights, bright, ordinary, completely indifferent, blurring as the door closed. She left. She told herself she was free. She booked 1 extra day she didn't need, and 1 extra day was all it took for them to find her. Episode 4. This is the one that doesn't let you breathe. Don't go anywhere.